Welcome, Gunrunner.
When somebody says Atari Handheld to you, then it's very likely you'll think of the Lynx, the wonderful handheld from 1989 that came in two equally tasty flavours. You might even think of the more recent Flashback Portable, a great little device for playing Atari 2600 games on the go. And if you really know your Atari history, then you may also be aware of the very earliest handheld, a portable version of the Touch Me arcade game. But you might also be thinking that for a company that was so prolific within the video game space, they didn't really embrace the portable market as perhaps they should have. And that is where this video comes in, because indeed, Atari did have many amazing plans for handheld consoles and computers over the years that never managed to make it out the door for some reason or another, and I'll be looking at 5 such examples right here. And I think you'll all be surprised just how tantalisingly close we came to seeing some of them. So with that little teaser vibrating in your ears, I'm going to get going with the meat of the matter.
Out here we entertain ourselves at home, so we got an Atari video game. There's so many different games to play. We especially like Space Invaders, zapping those little devils from outer space. It's fun, but personally I think the whole idea of creatures from outer space is a little far-fetched.
No other company offers you as many different video game cartridges as Atari.
Everyone's gone Atari, the #1 video game.
Given the Atari 2600 is by far Atari's most successful console, so much so that they're still supporting it in the present day and have recently recreated it in the form of the 2600 Plus, it makes sense to start off by looking at an unreleased 2600 Portable. And no, I'm not talking about the recent Flashback Portable that was released by AtGames or anything related to it, or indeed the more recently announced My Arcade Game Station Go, which also plays 2600 games. This is a true Atari 2600 handheld with a cartridge port that was planned for release in the early 80s. In fact, the idea of an Atari 2600 handheld was floated around for several years at the company, after they saw the huge success of standalone devices like the Nintendo Game & Watch range and Coleco arcade tabletops. But it seems that they couldn't really decide what form they wanted it to take or how the design could be implemented, as Reagan Chang's many sketches attest. There is a version that looks a lot like the unreleased 2500 with its built-in controls that plugs into a small portable screen. There are units that feature a small built-in screen of their own, and then there are others that take the word portable more literally, offering nothing more than a handle to carry them around, like the so-called portable computers of the time, such as the Osborne 1. In fact, there are actually no less than 24 different concept sketches for the Atari 2200 Portable, and if you want to see the whole set, then I strongly suggest heading over to the Atari Museum website after you finish watching this video, as they are seriously fascinating. I've linked this website in the description too, to make things easy for you. Interestingly, the 2200 moniker would be used once again by Atari as the original name for what would become the Atari 2600 Junior, just to confuse the historical timelines a little more. But I guess they do have a little bit in common, given they are both very small in size, and indeed, the released model of the 2600 Junior even came in a lunchbox type box with a handle so it could be carried around easily. Very much going back to one of the themes from those original designs. It's such a shame that Atari dropped the idea of an Atari handheld in favour of the Junior though, as I'm sure it would have been a huge success, given the 2600 was already designed to work on black and white TVs. A lower power consumption monochrome model like the Game Boy would have been perfect back in 1984, beating the Nintendo handheld to market by 5 years, and they could have added a higher priced colour model later on when the tech became viable. I'm sure had they released it, they could have dominated that sector for years.
Everyone's gone Atari, the #1 video game.
It turns out the 2200 wasn't the only handheld in development at Atari in the 80s, as there was another that seems almost space age in comparison, in the form of the Atari Cosmos. This was exactly the kind of revolutionary tech that Atari became known for, and presents one of the company's saddest and most baffling stories. The first work on the ill-fated Cosmos began back in 1978 by Atari engineers Al Alcorn, Harry Jenkins and Roger Hector. Atari themselves had wisely acquired a number of copyrights and patents to holographic technology in the hope that they could build a gaming system around them, and the Cosmos was the result of all their research and development. This wouldn't be a traditional console, however. The Cosmos was actually a handheld that utilised holographic technology to create a 3D effect.
Producing a new product here, which we call Cosmos. It's the first consumer product of any kind to utilize holographic displays, which are three-dimensional light images that are created inside this box here. Definitely working on more and more advanced forms of holography, and with the intent of bringing it to the consumer.
Roger Hector was kind enough to explain to me how this ambitious project got started when I interviewed him some years ago. It started with the three of us, and then we added the Holoptics lab team. Under Al, Atari had acquired all the patents in display holography, so they had the existing intellectual property locked up. Previously, these kind of holograms had to be individually developed like photos, which was very time-consuming and unsuitable for large-scale production. Steve McGrew managed to solve this problem with a breakthrough embossing technique. We quickly applied for patents on this and then started designing and prototyping several different holographic toys from handhelds to a game system to see what worked best. From there we brainstormed several designs for both flat and cylindrical animated holograms. It was all about experimenting and breaking new ground really, and Cosmos soon rose to the top of the pile. This concept featured multi-image flat hologram cartridges superimposed over a LED matrix. These LEDs would light up silhouette-like pictures themed to the game, and they appeared to merge with the holograms. There was nothing else quite like it. It was also very inexpensive to produce and absolutely blew away the competition in this category. Everything was progressing nicely within the Cosmos project, and it wasn't long before the production units were finalised. The finished Cosmos handheld was not only different from everything else on the market in the way it looked, it also used a very unique system to play the actual games too. Although they came on physical cartridges like any other console of the time, you also got one or more screen overlays with each game that had to be inserted into the unit. The Cosmos itself was only ever designed to play 9 different games, and inserting a cartridge would simply prompt the unit to use the correct logic circuit. In many ways, this was similar to the techniques used in the original Magnavox Odyssey, the very first home console. These titles included big names such as Superman, Space Invaders, Roadrunner and Asteroids, giving the system even more appeal. So what went wrong then? I think it's best that I let Roger himself explain. It went all the way through prototyping, tooling and production, with 8 different game cartridges. We showed Cosmos at both the 1981 CES show and Toy Fair, taking a year's worth of production orders across the 2 shows. But subsequently, Warner's upper management inexplicably decided not to release the Cosmos. The official reason, as told to me directly by Atari's CEO Ray Kassar, was that they had overbooked orders for the VCS and needed more production capacity. Ray assured me that they had decided to just hold off on Cosmos for now, but this sounded to me like it was being permanently shelved, and I turned out to be right about this, as soon after Al Alcorn was asked to shut down the lab completely and all Cosmos inventory was subsequently destroyed. This catalogue of catastrophic events greatly angered the Cosmos team, and several of them, Roger included, quit Atari in disgust. Internal memos have since proved that the Cosmos was scrapped because Warner management felt it would take sales away from the 2600, and the limited games selection left little room to make substantial profits from it. Some Cosmos units and test holograms were sneaked out of the lab before it was shut down and can often be found displayed at various gaming expos around the world, so go and check it out if you get the chance. It just shows what utter turmoil Atari were in at this time, that they would just completely scrap a console after it had already gone into production, rather than just release it and make some money. Such a shame.
Everyone's gone Atari, the #1 video game.
Okay, so I'm actually cheating slightly with this next one, because it's not really a console at all, it is in fact a portable computer. But given the XE range did also include a console in the form of the Atari XE game system, I'd say it's more than worthy of inclusion here and presents yet another interesting what-if story for all you Atari fans. In fact, the 65 XEP, as this particular system is known, actually represents the very first portable computer designed by Atari, well before the Stacy, ST-Book or Terminator 2 starring Portfolio came along. Coincidentally, I'll link videos about all of those down in the description for those who might want to know more about the rather awesome Atari badged laptop computers. The 65 XEP was first exhibited at the 1985 CES show, where Atari also debuted the 16-bit ST alongside the rest of the new XE range, which were of course a cost-reduced redesign of the existing Atari 8-bit XL computers. It might have been somewhat of an afterthought given the ST was now the focus of Atari's future, but the 65 XEP also garnered a lot of interest and attention from the press of the era, most notably for its striking looks. This portable computer featured a 3.5-inch disk drive, a 5-inch green screen CRT and a rather large battery pack, but was otherwise identical to the 64K 65XE computer on a hardware level. I think it's pretty obvious that with the 65 XEP, Atari intended to compete with the very similar Commodore SX64 that had been created by Jack Trammell's previous company. However, the Atari model would be priced a lot cheaper than its rival, touted at being under $400. Both Atari and Commodore's portable computers were of course an evolution of a design first implemented by the Osborne 1 in 1981, widely credited as the first portable computer. It would definitely be a stretch to call any of these laptops. However, all news on the 65 XEP went quiet soon after this show, and it never made it out the door at Sunnyvale. Only one prototype of the machine has ever been found, and it's unclear why it never went into production. But it's been speculated that the less than rousing reception to the rival Commodore SX64 likely had a lot to do with its cancellation, along with the very high cost of producing it.
Everyone's gone Atari, the number one video game.
Now, I bet you all thought the Atari VCS was the first and only new console created by the modern iteration of Atari. Yeah, I'm not counting the 2600 or 7800 Plus, as they are updates on existing consoles. But you'd actually be wrong. Well, kind of. Because this one is more of a hybrid system really, but then so is the VCS I suppose actually. Just over 10 years ago, at the 2014 E3 Expo, Atari showed what they claimed was their first new piece of hardware since the Jaguar, in the form of the Super Zoom Phablet. Yeah, they were clearly trying to sound cool with that name and failed pretty hard. I say new, but this was actually nothing more than an Android-based tablet that came with some kind of custom firmware that launched into an Atari store where you could buy their new Android-based games like Breakout Boost, Outlaw and Haunted House Revisited, as well as many other useful apps. What is especially interesting about this is that it came in a range of rather confusing varieties. Firstly, there are the standard phablets, and then there is the so-called premium line that came with much more powerful Intel processors inside. And then within these two groups, you also have proper gaming tablets that have built-in controls and standard pads with nothing to set them apart from other Android tablets on the market at this time, except for the Atari logo on the back. But that's not all. If you chose one of the standard tablets, there are a range of accessories you can use with them, including controllers, speakers, headphones and stick-on thumbsticks. And within these there are also numerous variations just to confuse the range of options further. And it's safe to say that the reception to these devices was less than enthusiastic, and this expo was the first and only time Atari Super Zoom Phablets was shown to the public. I'm not sure if any were actually sold at the event, or whether they were just there for show, and I've never encountered anyone who has one in their possession sadly. But it would certainly be an interesting oddity to add to any Atari collection, even if it was an incredibly ill thought out and misguided venture indeed.
Everyone's gone Atari, the number one video game.
I decided to save this one until the end, because it's the story that I find the most interesting, and this one is perhaps even more baffling than the scrapping of the Cosmos, because this is another that made it into full production before being pulled from the market. Like that last entry, the Phablet, it's also a range of products rather than one individual handheld. And to start this story, we have to rewind all the way back to 1978, when Atari were ruling the arcades and had recently released their new video computer system console to incredibly positive reception. A home computer was also now in development, which would become the Atari 800, and it was looking to conquer every part of the video game industry. But there was one small but ever-growing sector that had eluded them thus far: the handheld sector. Companies like Mattel and Coleco, who would of course become Atari's biggest rivals in the console space, were starting to make huge waves in the handheld sector. And Atari knew they needed to act quickly if they wanted to grab a slice of the pie. So that very same year, they set up a new office in New York City to develop and manufacture a new range of electronic games and toys. The first product to come out of Atari's new toy division was the Touch Me Handheld, which I mentioned in the intro of course, an electronic game where the object was to watch the flashing lights, each associated to a colour and sound, and then repeat them back. This idea would of course be ripped off by Ralph Baer and Milton Bradley to create the Simon, often cited as being Ralph's revenge for Nolan stealing the idea for Pong from his TV tennis game for the Magnavox Odyssey. But before the Simon, Milton Bradley released an even more revolutionary portable, the MB Microvision, which is credited as the first ever handheld console, hitting the market in November 1979, some 10 years before the Nintendo Game Boy debuted. What made the Microvision unique when compared to other handhelds of the time was not just the fact it used ROM cartridges, it was also its ability to display actual pixels on the screen, rather than predefined cells like other LCD-based handhelds of the era. Having seen an early version of what the Microvision had to offer, Atari's engineers set about developing something very similar, knowing that their own unit would have the added star appeal of ports of Atari's many hit arcade games. It wasn't long before they had versions of games like Super Breakout, Space Invaders and Asteroids running on their new hardware. Having presented the new Atari electronic game to the bosses in Sunnyvale, the New York division were rather shocked at the negativity they got back. Then Atari's CEO Ray Kazar apparently felt that this handheld would eat into their console division and take sales away from the video computer system, especially as Space Invaders had quickly become the console's killer app. So the decision was made to replace a single handheld that would play ROM cartridges with a range of standalone units that would just play a single game, much like the devices we saw from the other companies I mentioned earlier. The first two games that were chosen for release were Super Breakout and Space Invaders. All the units were produced and shown at various expos, and they were advertised in magazines as well, and even previewed in some large stores as the next big thing. But then nothing. They never actually arrived. Yet another head-shaking decision from Atari, and once again it's Ray Kazar we can thank for all this. Just as the units were being loaded onto trucks to ship to stores across the country, he had a change of heart and pulled them from the market and destroyed all the inventory. He reasoned that there was a lot less long-term profit in marketing this limited range of handhelds, as VCS owners would continually add new cartridges to their collection rather than just sticking with a single game, which also created more brand loyalty. While some of his reasoning is fairly sound, you can't help but wonder just how much money Atari and in turn Warner wasted in developing, manufacturing and advertising these handhelds only to throw it all away. It's just another perfect example of a raft of poor decision making going on at Warner Atari that ultimately came to a head in the North American video game crash of 1983. Yet another head-shaking decision from Atari that would ultimately be proved wrong, as the handheld sector exploded with companies like Nintendo, Bandai and Tiger Electronics joining Mattel and Coleco to rake in the profits. It's actually been quoted that it was also the arrival of the MB Microvision that persuaded Nintendo to enter the handheld sector and eventually develop a portable console of their own in the form of the Game Boy. If only Atari's leadership at that time hadn't been so obsessed with profits and had been a bit more forward-thinking.
Did you try breakout with a moving wall? Did you try breakout with an extra ball? It's what fun's all about. It's Super Breakout. It's a brand new game from Atari. Have you you played Atari today?
If you liked Breakout, you'll love Super Breakout. It's got more color, more sound, and more action. And naturally, it's from Atari.
Have you played Atari today?
And that ends my look at 5 unreleased Atari handhelds. Which one of these do you most wish had made it out the door? Or do you think that Atari were right to cancel them all? I always love to read your views and comments, so please get typing in the comment section below this video. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons and YouTube members for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following people in particular for their much appreciated pledges: D. Vaughan, Albert Davis, Richard Baker, Martin Wiggins, Peter Grantham, Bernard Santu, Mins, Classic Gamer 74, Josh Hartman, Daniel Skronsky, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitson, Grady Haynes, Paul Daniel, Seth A. Robinson, Climatorn, Carl Olsen, Mark Strickland, Big Chuzzle, Carl Cloping, Black Siren, John Alberino, Krispy Kreme, Justin Cooney, Tellboy 2011, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support this channel, you can now join as a member for as little as £2 a month, where you will get access to exclusive videos and updates and much more. Just click the button on my community page to get started. My Patreon is also still available if you prefer to support me in other ways too. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.